Hi, everyone. We will get started shortly. Thank you so much for taking the time to join today's Heat Resilient Communities webinar. We just opened the webinar, so we'll just allow for a couple of minutes so people can join the audience. Just a couple of housekeeping things to note as we get started. You can see us, but we cannot see you. So if you are still in your sweatpants, we have no idea, and that is a-okay. But you are a key part of the conversation today. So please go ahead and let us know what you are thinking, dialogue with other people in the audience, and it'd be great to know who all is joining us today. So if you could go ahead and type in the chat who you are and where you're joining us from, that will help us and make sure that the panelists know who all is joining us today. And then if you have questions as we go through the next hour talking about heat resilient communities, please type those questions for panelists in the Q&A. That will help us out and keep the questions separate from the chat. Feel free to drop any sort of links and resources that you have in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and start recording in, actually, we're already recording. Sorry about that. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's Heat Resilient Communities webinar. My name is Serena Unrein, and I am with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities, which is managed by LISC Phoenix. We are so grateful to Arcos Health for their sponsorship of this year's Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities webinar series. Once a quarter, we'll bring together practitioners from various sectors to share best practices, data, policies, and ideas to help improve community health. This year's webinar series explores critical topics at the intersection of health, equity, and sustainability through the lens of climate change. Today, our panel of experts will delve into the unique set of challenges confronting our desert cities, offering community-based approaches and innovative solutions. In the face of escalating occurrences of extreme heat events in the Southwest, this webinar seeks to equip attendees with the ideas and actions necessary to safeguard the welfare of individuals and families at the forefront of one of climate change's most deadly dangers. A few things to note again before we get into the conversation shortly. You can see us, but we cannot see you. You are a key part of the conversation, even if you aren't on screen. So please share your ideas and thoughts in the chat, and use the Q&A function to ask any questions you might have of the panelists. I'll be answering or making sure that the panelists see those questions throughout the next hour, so please type any questions you might have into the Q&A box. We will be recording this webinar and sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered for today's webinar. The follow-up email will include links to any resources our speakers reference during the webinar. And now that's enough for me. I'd like to have each of our panelists introduce themselves so you can get to know them a little better. I'll start with you, Maren. And for each of you, please share your name, who you work for, or what organizations you're with, and any helpful background we should know about you.
Hi, thank you, Serena. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here this afternoon. I'm Maren Mahoney. I'm the director of the Office of Resiliency under Governor Katie Hobbs. Our office weaves together energy, water, land use, and transportation policy areas, and we administer state energy office programming, including an upcoming program for home energy rebates for people to install energy efficiency measures and energy efficient appliances in their homes. That will be coming in several months. And then the office also conducts a number of cross-sector planning for resilience. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. Saul, I'll have you introduce yourself next.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Saul Pacheco from Mesa, Arizona. I work with Rail CDC. I do small business engagement and community coordinating for them in a few different corridors, Apache corridor in Tempe, the McDowell corridor in Phoenix, but mainly the Distrito Latino corridor near downtown Mesa. Rail is a nonprofit organization, and a lot of the work that we do falls under the anti-displacement umbrella, with a lot of emphasis on environmental, social, and economic justices. We've been fortunate enough to do a lot of work with our partners like Arizona State University, the city of Tempe, and the city of Mesa, which all handle or do a great job with environmental justice and climate.
Great. So glad to have you here today. And of course, last but not least, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you. Nicole Rodriguez. I serve on, oops, I'm sorry about that. Here I am again. So yeah, I serve on the Urban Phoenix Project Board as well as Trees Matter nonprofit boards and a few other housing related boards. Here in Phoenix, Arizona is where I've lived for about 20 years. I'm a community advocate, and I'm also a certified arborist, certified utility arborist. I used to work in the utility space for a number of years as well. Live here in Central Phoenix and work closely with the city and other governments to help, and used to actually serve on an urban heat island tree and shade subcommittee with the city of Phoenix to look at different ways to approach that are efficient and long lasting as it relates to heat resilience. And of course, trees are very, very critical and important. And with that too, my family and I, we get around without a vehicle most days of the year, even in the heat. So bike and walk and taking transit. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you here and so glad to have this great group of panelists. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise today. And I'd also like to thank all of the audience members for attending. Thank you to everyone for introducing yourselves in the chat. It's great to see people from all across the state and even someone from Chicago. So that's exciting that more folks are interested in heat resilient communities. And continue to go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat throughout the next hour. And for our panelists, I'd like each of you to answer this first question so we can understand your unique perspective on heat resilient communities. Increased heat as a result of climate change isn't just some distant threat. Last year in Maricopa County, we saw the highest number of heat deaths during a record-breakingly hot summer. And with summer right around the corner, what's top of mind to you when you think about heat preparedness and resiliency? Maren, again, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so like you said, last summer was our hottest summer ever, but we have been seeing year after year an increase in both maximum and most alarmingly maybe minimum temperatures. And so we know that this is something that our communities are going to be facing into our future. And so Governor Hobbs issued an executive order last summer, which required us or directed the state agencies to develop an extreme heat preparedness plan. And I led that effort, and that plan was delivered in March. And I think the development of that plan was really built upon the efforts happening at the local and county levels that have been going on for a number of years. So this summer, we're seeing a lot of more increased collaboration and communication between the state agencies on heat preparedness, and then also across jurisdictions. So we're meeting regularly with our county health officials, emergency managers, and working with, again, across state agencies as well, which we hadn't really seen before, this level of increased attention. One of the recommendations from the Extreme Heat Preparedness Plan was to create a chief heat officer position, which at the state level, and so that was created, and Dr. Eugene LeVar is the nation's first state level chief heat officer. And he is leading 6 different working groups with our county partners and nonprofit partners. One, it's a focus on heat relief coordination, another one on sustainability policy and innovation, another on data, and then building a strong infrastructure, and then also communicating. So increasing that awareness and the communications. Another initiative that's happening right now is the development of heat threshold. So it's a tiered heat threshold so that we can know when and to what degree do we need to the various state jurisdictions and agencies need to coordinate and direct heat interventions. So that is being developed in real time right now with our partners. And it's tricky, right? Because the different agencies and the different jurisdictions have different requirements and criteria for their interventions. But I think this also shows, this effort shows that we all understand we need to be operating from the same page and the same shared understanding as to what heat, extreme heat, what what those mean and what those mean for government services. So that is also happening. And then I'd say there's also there's a lot more there are more resources available at the beginning of heat season. So it kind of goes towards that point that we have more coordination and preparedness happening at all levels. We've got that more increased proactivity, if you will, rather than that reactivity. So one, for instance, something I'm really excited to talk about is the development of 18 solar-powered mobile cooling units, which are retrofitted shipping containers that are going to be deployed in different locations throughout the state. And Dr. LeVar has developed criteria and is working with partners or jurisdictions who have requested those cooling units and to decide the optimal location for those units. So like I said, a number of new interventions, but building upon work that has already been in the works for a number of years.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all of the things that are happening at the state level. And Saul, I'll have you go ahead and answer what's top of mind to you when you think about heat preparedness and resiliency.
Well, I mean, there's like long-term and short-term, I guess. Like some of the work that we've done in the Southside neighborhood is like a tree planting, because we want to develop an eventual like tree canopies, because a lot of the people in those communities either walk to school or to work. So we all know the strength of the heat and the sun and how it affects people. So that's more long-term and with the tree growth, but at the same time, just establishment of more like temporary shade structures along the way, along the walking paths or the riding paths as well, or at bus stops. I know a lot of them are supposed to have them, but as we walk through the neighborhoods and we kind of talk to the people, I'm not sure if it just differs in different neighborhoods or different zip codes, but like a lot of the bus stops don't have shade structures over them. Cooling hubs, like Maren had mentioned, is very important as well. And I know the city of Tempe has one, and there's a church in the downtown Mesa area, the First Methodist Church, that also has a building that they open up for the community to come in, drink some water, and cool off. So those are kind of some of the ways to alleviate some of the heat exhaustion for the people in the community.
Thanks, Saul. And Nicole, how about your perspective?
Yeah, just to build upon that, some of the most critical infrastructure is always going to be trees, and any kind of infrastructure for that matter that can lend shade. And one of the aspects we commonly come back to is, where to put these trees and what resources do we need for trees. And really, and I'll drop it here in the chat, but U of A put out a good study on how little water usage trees have compared to so many other needs out there, or not even necessarily needs, but trees in comparison to even producing some of the most basic things of food and even clothing consume a lot less water. And we have desert adapted trees that can withstand the extreme heat to pretty well. It's getting pretty hot to where a lot of trees do kind of suffer through those months a little bit, but that is some of the most critical aspects that we need to get serious about, and can easily plant 1 million trees with the right resources. You have these great nonprofits and government agencies and a number of other nonprofits that I could always list in the chat as well, but the time is now. And actually the time was yesterday. Like Maren mentioned, we've been talking about this for quite some time. So we're at that point. It's a really critical point. We have to be active. You could do only so much planning to where it's like, I believe it's paralysis by analysis you'll hear sometimes, which it is good to have that background of analysis, but we're at that stage where I think we've been at that paralysis by analysis for a little bit too long, and we need to act on it. Some of the most critical other infrastructure to consider, and cities can never cut these out ever again, are community centers, libraries. That's where even my family will go if we're out walking and it's hot and we're trying to run errands. We need to have public spaces to step into. Parks are critical as well, and even considering keeping parks open later or opening them earlier. And those are other aspects to where sometimes people, when they're homeless, that's the most critical place for them to go, is when they're able to go someplace and not maybe get harassed out of there because they're there too early or too late. And we just in general need to consider some of these low-hanging fruits.
Great perspectives and great insights to already start us off. And I just wanted to encourage the audience members to engage with your thoughts in the chat. If you have questions that you think of as our panelists are speaking, please feel free to ask any questions you might have in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many audience questions as possible. And I'll do that throughout the next 45 minutes. So don't feel like you have to save your questions for the end. I wanted to go back to something Saul mentioned about how Rail CDC works with members of the community to engage them in conversation about what they need. And I'd love for us to hear a little bit more about how Rail CDC works with the community and what you all have found successful.
Well, one of the methods that we use is what we call like community pláticas or small business pláticas. And for those of you that don't know what a plática is, it's a conversation or a chat. We tend to have them about once a month, and it's an informal conversation, and we get people from the community to come attend. We provide it's like a little café and pan dulce in the mornings, and we typically have them at like parks in the neighborhood when weather permits. And if not, my family owns a restaurant there in downtown Mesa, so we typically have these pláticas on Sunday morning. So they're closed on Sunday, so we're able to use that during the hotter months, and then even in the cooler months, if we even consider ourselves to have a winter here. But we just talk to just have an open conversation with the people in the community. We want them to be part of like some of the decision making, and then how they see their neighborhoods now and how they look to have them in the future as well. We want their voices to be heard. We want them to be part of the difference making and how the changes will come about. We do a bunch of different activities, which Jen helps us out design, just to kind of gather the information and put this all information together, present it to either the city or different organizations that could help us out and kind of make some of the change. One of the things that we like to do, or Augie does an amazing job with, is what we call a walking audit. And we walk through the neighborhoods that we're working in, and we have a little questionnaire that they have. And then as we're walking through the neighborhoods, we kind of point out different things as well. Like, what's the conditions of the sidewalks? What's the conditions of the roads? What's the conditions of the parks? Is there proper lighting? Is there ramps like accessible for like either wheelchairs or strollers? Like, do they feel safe walking through the neighborhood? Is there sidewalk? Is there bike lanes? Is there enough shade? Is there like enough trees, or what kind of different like aspects they would want to see change? So I think when you involve the community and then their voices, I feel like they feel more empowered, and then they feel better, like willing to participate and be part of the discussion more and more as well.
That's amazing. If people wanted to learn more about the Platicas or the walking audit, how would is there information on the Rail CDC website, or how would you recommend that they get in touch with Rail to learn more about how you all have gone about community engagement and coordination?
Yeah, we have a lot of it on either like our social media or the railcdc.org website as well. We tend to do a pretty good job of updating that website and the social media as well. So we kind of give them an idea of what events are coming up and when and what time. So if they want to participate, they're more than welcome to come out whenever they can.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just really appreciate you sharing that insight. And I'm sure that that's interesting to a lot of audience members. And I encourage you, if you have a chance to get out to Mesa and see some of the great work that's happening in Mesa and engage further with Rail CDC, I highly encourage you to do so. I wanted to get back to the earlier conversation that we were having with Maren about the extreme heat preparedness plan. And I think one of the things that was kind of layered in there was talking about how there are additional resources for communities. And I know that there are some resources that are newer for heat resiliency and for communities across the state. So Maren, would you share some of the opportunities that are out there for local governments and what you think is really exciting that people can take advantage of? Because I know we have a lot of people who are joining us today from government agencies.
Sure, yeah. The extreme heat plan was really focused on making sure that at the state agency level that we were all working together as one on the same page, if you will, on the heat preparedness and response. But we do know that, for instance, with emergency response in particular, that that the actions occur at the local level. That's really, and then they bubble up through to the county level, and then state and federal if necessary, right? And so I know that a lot of the work has been going on at the municipal level in particular. There's a new approach this year in terms of making sure that if there's a request for needs for increased funding for water supplies or things like that, that this goes through the emergency response or the emergency management channels, because this way we have a better sense of what are the needs on the ground, and that can actually then trigger or inform those community lifelines, which is what emergency managers use to determine the level of response needed. So that's not a resource necessarily, but it is a new process in place that is really important for communities to know about, because that's the channels that we're going to be looking for to look and see at what when heightened response and when heightened resources need to be directed. So that's one new change that we're seeing. Let's see. We also, like I said, we also have those cooling centers that are mobile cooling units. But kind of along those lines, there's a new heat relief coordinator who is sitting at the Department of Health Services now that we didn't have in place last summer. And that person is helping optimize cooling centers. We know that there's a lot of the cooling centers operate they're working together, but there's not a lot of coordination at more the county or the state level. That this year we've got not only a heat relief coordinator at the state level to help optimize resources at cooling centers or heat relief centers throughout the state, but I know at least in Maricopa County, there's also the Maricopa Association of Governments has brought on board a cooling center coordinator. And that is intended to make sure that our cooling centers can save money, for instance, be more efficient in their operations and services. They might be, if they've got a lot of water bottles, let's say in one location, another location is in great need, that there's that coordination available, which wasn't there before. There are new extreme weather shelters have received over $1 million from our Department of Housing in order to expand or extend their hours for people seeking relief from extreme weather, and that includes heat. And those are 4 locations throughout the state. One was, I believe, it's in City of Flagstaff. One is Verde Valley. One is in City of Phoenix and in Tucson. So it kind of spans the from top to bottom of the state. We've got a new chief heat officer, which I probably should have mentioned earlier. So Dr. LeVar has been with the Department of Health Services for over a decade. He is both a medical doctor and an epidemiologist and has great experience in health preparedness. He is the nation's first state-level chief heat officer and is charged with implementing that extreme heat preparedness plan that we developed. And so he is working with a number of partners around the state to develop new policies, new communications, and new approaches to extreme heat. So those are just a few of the really great resources that are now available that weren't really in place last summer. I guess maybe one more thing, the state has revised our a few of our policies for state employees. So for one thing, state employees can now, with the approval of their supervisor, can now get paid to go volunteer at a cooling center, for instance. So we know that one of the challenges with the cooling centers is they might have the physical location available, but they don't have the staffing, and that staffing often often is through volunteers or through maybe like if it's a church, the church personnel will be there staffing that. So this is another way to supplement that great need. And then also our state procurement manual has been amended in order to allow for state employees we have a lot of state employees who work outside. So we make sure that they're now they can use state dollars to purchase things like Gatorade so that they can replenish their resources and stay healthy while they work. And yeah, I'll stop there, but there's a number of things, actions like that have been put in place that is different. In terms of, I know you said actually that for local communities to understand what's available at the state. Again, I think it's really important to understand how emergency response happens in this state, and the process through which we go through. So starting at the local level, we want to make sure that the resources that are already available at the local level are depleted before then escalating up to maybe the county and then again up to the state, because we know that the need is there, but we also know that there are resources, and we want to make sure that we are using our resources appropriately, and that that we have a more coordinated response. And so I think that this all goes through into this more coordinated response we're seeing at multiple jurisdictional levels.
Thanks, Maren. That's super helpful to understand what all has been happening at the state level. And clearly you all have been busy. So thank you for sharing all of that insight. I wanted to also get the perspective about what's happening on the community level as well. We know that the hottest neighborhoods tend to have the lowest tree canopy and also the fewest resources to cope with rising temperatures. So Nicole, I'll start with you, and Saul, I'd also love to hear your perspective. How would you like to see government and community organizations engage with people who are at most risk from increased heat?
Yeah, so I could share a little bit of a personal story on this too with South Phoenix. I do live in Central Phoenix, but this topic of urban heat has been near and dear for several years, because when I first came to Phoenix 20 years ago, I came without a car, and I know the experience of waiting at a bus stop, and I was trying to get a job at that time. And I would show up drenched in sweat, and that was frowned upon because there was very few places for me to wait for a bus or even walk where there was adequate shade. And this was in late May, early June timeframe 20 years ago. That still exists today. And it's I think, like what Saul mentioned earlier, is building that community trust can be a challenge at times, especially when they've been neglected for so long in these vulnerable areas. With South Phoenix, we did a tree planting. I spearheaded with a friend of mine, and then brought on Trees Matter to help support at Lindo Park. And some of the challenges that we learned there at Lindo Park is that a lot of parks in South Phoenix, and I believe some of the public golf courses too, are actually in areas where there are assumed to be a high number of archaeological sites, cultural sites, so it's protected. So to be able to plant a tree just, a foot deep into the ground, if you're planting a small tree, would require an archaeologist and a lot of red tape to get through. And unfortunately, at that time, ran into a lot of obstacles, I would say, working with the city at the time to get this accomplished. And it took us 2 years to from start to finish. And it really shouldn't be that way. And I think it was a learning experience for us. And hopefully it's never that way again for any of those really hot regions, which for the Valley in Phoenix is going to be primarily lower central Phoenix, south of downtown, South Phoenix, and West Phoenix. The resources are there, but we still do things status quo quite a bit. And, I saw someone mention in the chat earlier about irrigation water. Yes, but, those are actually where irrigation tends to be available. Those are the neighborhoods that tend to have the most shade. And they're also the neighborhoods who tend most of the time to be the more affluent areas. So we're talking about South Phoenix, where irrigation is not as available. And actually, in some of these regions, and actually a lot of the properties they don't own them. There are a lot of rental properties. So it's really hard to go into a neighborhood and say, hey, let's plant trees in your yard. Well, they got to check with the landlord, and maybe the landlord doesn't want to upkeep those trees, or it could even be, hey, we don't have the money to help jumpstart this tree and water it to help it, get started in its first year to 3 years of life. So where I come back to quite often is who is one of our biggest land agencies. Believe it or not, we don't think of it this way, but it's typically our transportation and streets departments. Streets, we have very wide streets throughout the valley, and streets are one of those opportunities where trees can be planted, whether it's in the middle, if an esplanade was created, or even creating cool corridors along the sidewalks. We need to be looking at it from a public perspective rather than putting the onus on these property owners, because still, once again, in these really hot areas, a lot of those properties are rentals. And it does no one any good to keep trying to go at it from that approach of trying to put it on the private property owner, when it's actually the cities and the county and other agencies who have that real estate, that land that has so much potential for it, for us to utilize it for a shade opportunity. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that this is an interesting stat. I mentioned earlier, I get around primarily, my family and I get around primarily without a vehicle. In Phoenix, 43% of households own 0 to 1 vehicle. That's 43% in Phoenix. And an average household in Phoenix has 3 people in it. So an average household has 3 people in it, 0 to 1, 43% of own 0 to 1 vehicles. And that's actually huge, but we don't always see that. We think of streets are for drivers and cars because they take up so much space, right? When you see a pedestrian, they're not really taking up that much space. And a lot of times when we're driving, we don't always notice them, or people on bikes. So we designed the city to really retain a lot of heat and around the auto driver. But believe it or not, there's a high percentage of people who do not get around by vehicle. But that's what I'm trying to say here. It's so hard to see that, especially if you're on a freeway. Hopefully you don't see any pedestrians or people on bikes. But it is really hard to experience and be more aware of your surroundings if you're only getting around in a vehicle. So I really urge agencies to get out there. For some folks will do a challenge for a week. I say get out there. Get out there for months to really experience the landscape and walk it. It feels crazy at times. And where there's no shade, you really start to feel the impacts on your health. And even in the times of the month like October and April, where it's not quite as hot yet, it really can have an impact on health. And you do feel that. And it's something I think we should all experience, because then we will better prioritize the urgency here that we should have been prioritizing decades ago.
Saul, and thank you for that, Nicole. That was a really thoughtful response. Saul, I wanted to give you a chance. I don't know if you want to hop in about how you'd like to see governments and community organizations engage with people who are at most risk from increased heat, but I, of course, wanted to give you a chance to hop in.
Well, it's kind of similar to when Nicole was saying something about, I saw that post that somebody had put as well about the irrigation and how like that helps people grow trees or whatever, but like we're doing some work with the city of Tempe, and we with the people in the community, we put together like an climate advisory group, and we've have a series of like 8 workshops. We're about halfway done through them right now, but one of the discussions that we had in one of the workshops was irrigation, right? And like one of the members, Rupinder, he was like, how do I not have irrigation and like the person across the street does? Like, I would like irrigation. I have the openings, I have the panels, I have everything that's there, but why do they not allow me to have it, but somebody either like 2 streets down or like a street across the street, they do? Like, how do I get the city to like allow me to have it? And like, I don't have that answer. And we're hoping to work with them and talk to the city as well, because they're there, but I don't think that they're the ones that are in charge of the irrigation and all that other stuff. And I don't even know if they have the answers, to be honest. But stuff like that is kind of like where I see, like, you know, you need to make it fair for everybody, not just like where you decide to like turn off the water and turn it on. Like, and the same goes for some of the areas in downtown Mesa as well. Like, you see the Evergreen neighborhood and it's lush and it's green, and you go down half a mile and like their irrigation is not even existing anymore either. They kind of like block it off, or they don't allow them to have it anymore. So I like to see that be a discussion again. I want to see if they're able to get the irrigation. And another thing too is like, it goes back to the trees as well. Like I always see like city organizations or the city itself, or talk about, oh, we want to plant like this many trees in this amount of time. But a lot of the trees that they're planting is like either in their downtown corridor where all the businesses are. They already have trees that are there and healthy, but they decide to kind of like take them down. Let's put a new tree, a fresh tree, so they can grow. But I don't feel like they put enough emphasis in then allowing the people in the neighborhoods and like the more at-risk neighborhoods and vulnerable neighborhoods that really do need the trees. So they need to be more fair about how they like where they go and how many go where. But it needs to just be like fair for everybody, I believe.
I just want to chime in here. I think Saul and Nicole, you both like bring up a really great point that equity is so important here when it comes to heat. Everyone experiences our 110-degree days, but we experience them very differently. And there are certain populations that we know very well are much more exposed and much more vulnerable to risks from, you know, heat illness and death. And we know who they are. We know it's seniors, we know it's young children and infants, and people who work outside in agriculture or construction, people who work inside but in non-climate controlled conditions, like a kitchen, a restaurant kitchen. We know people who don't have shelter or stable shelter, and then there's people with pre-existing medical conditions. Like, I actually just this morning read an article about how there's they found that heat increases asthma attacks in children with who have asthma, and that was a significant percent, by like 19% or something. And so this is going to increase multiple. It's going to trigger multiple factors. I think it's comorbidity might be the right word here, right? Where you've got like a few different, health challenges, or maybe even societal barriers, and heat is just going to increase those challenges. So government needs my point, I guess, here, to bring it back to what you were both said, was the government really needs to identify, where are the interventions here in order to support people with those extra challenges.
Really important point. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Saul, thank you for that really insightful story. I want to back up one quick second. Nicole brought up cool corridors, and I'm not sure if everyone knows what cool corridors are. And I would love to learn a little bit more. So if you don't mind just explaining what those are, I think that might be really helpful for the audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in explaining it, I'm going to actually build off on what they were just talking about, the other panelists. So cool corridors, right now for the city of Phoenix, every year there's so many trees that are supposed to be planted in each council district. And we have 8 council districts in Phoenix. And I'm not sure, maybe Tempe does something similar. I'm pretty sure they do, but cool corridors is where so many trees get planted along a stretch of roadway, preferably a roadway where there's going to be a pedestrian use, or high bike and pedestrian use of a corridor being a street, right? And that money was set aside, I believe it was back in 2021. There was a budget hearing where a lot of people from South Phoenix actually, it was during COVID, so a lot of people were able to engage on the virtual budget hearings, which was awesome. And keep that in mind, because not everyone has the same capacity. So when you start hearing people from underserved regions really showing up to budget hearing meetings or any community meeting because you're offering it virtual, you should probably still keep doing those in a high volume. So anyways, a result of that was cool corridors. And one of the things I wanted to pitch in there about the cool corridors is equity, because, and I'm not trying to be provocative here, well, maybe a little bit, but something for folks to really think about when we say equity, what does that really mean? Because right now, today, the city of Phoenix is doing a cool corridor equity program because equally each district gets the same amount of trees planted for the same amount of stretch. And really that is not equity. Sure, it's equity because each district is getting an equal amount of the same piece of the pie, but really equity, it needs to go towards those areas that are most underserved. And those districts that are some of the shadiest ones won't have the same opportunity, and that is okay. And that's something we need to be more bold about. And even with citizen type boards, for instance, if the city of Phoenix were to ever create a tree and shade type of advisory board, one of the recommendations that I would give is, hey, you could have an equal amount from each council district, but make sure you have additional folks from those council districts that have been underserved for way too long. Because one of the interesting thing is that we commonly, when we're getting these grants for heat resilience, we're getting these grants for these regions of the city that have been underserved by design for way too long, whereas they oftentimes are generating some of the highest property tax values too. And it's kind of, it can be very, like what Saul mentioned earlier too, where the community doesn't have trust because they've been there for so long giving and have never had anything or very little in return. And so we sometimes just have to say no to these other areas that are affluent, even though they have oftentimes the loudest voices. We hear it with so many types of things, whether it's, with bike lanes or housing. It's time for the leaders to be at the city level, government level, to be the voices of those who don't always have the capacity to share their own voice. And that's by design, and we need to reverse that. And that was a little bit off of what, you asked me about cool corridors, but hopefully folks understand. I just really wanted to throw in there the equity piece, because when you say equity, what does that really mean? And we need to get better about defining that. When we see it in documents, for instance, about heat resilience, let's really describe it. And if it makes us uncomfortable, then good. It's probably something we need to talk about more then. So hopefully that helps.
It absolutely does. And this is your soapbox to say what you have to say. So I'm glad you're sharing those thoughts. I'm going to get to the audience question from Rexter Chambers. Thank you for putting that in the Q&A in just a second. But first, I wanted to make sure that everyone was checking out the chat because we have some really great resources in the chat. Reed Butler was sharing a story about a program from 20 years ago and how there was a tree canopy and shade corridor developed in downtown Phoenix. So thanks for sharing that story, Reed. Augie Gastelum from Rail CDC shared a link to the walking audit report, a draft report from the La Victoria neighborhood in Tempe. So be sure to check that out because walking audits are so cool. And I just wanted to make sure that if you weren't following along in the chat, that your attention also went there because there are a ton of great resources and conversations happening there. So to get to Rexter's question in the Q&A, and thank you for asking that, was about if there are any good regulations in municipalities to help reduce the urban heat island effect and stormwater runoff. So I think Nicole might have some insight there, so I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
And I'll be real brief too. So yes, with the city of Phoenix, and I think it could be improved upon. From my understanding on the outside looking in as a community advocate, they were looking to mirror a little bit of what Tucson has done with stormwater runoff. And I'm so glad you asked that question because there was some challenge and a lot of red tape in trying to get maybe stormwater runoff through curb cuts. So if you were to work with your streets department and say, I want to do a curb cut now to have stormwater to run into my property, to help divert it and then, water our plants and trees. That was a huge challenge. And there was some expenses to just getting some permits for that. And I believe a lot of that has been alleviated. Some of the organizations I recommend reaching out to that were a key stakeholder at the table during those discussions. One was Trees Matter. And that's the staff there at Trees Matter. I'm on the board, but the staff there were hyper engaged in those conversations at the city level. And this is probably very similar for Tempe. I'm sorry, I don't have more information on that. So wanted to keep that part really brief. So thanks for the question.
You bet. Thanks for the audience question and thanks for the potential resources. I don't want to catch any of our panelists flat-footed, so I'll give you a second to think about this question. But one of the things that has come up a lot on our conversation so far would be the intersection between land use planning and infrastructure and how those things impact heat. And I think we continue to have this conversation in Arizona around land use and how we can think about land use and how we can design and build our communities. So when you think about land use and heat, what do you think Arizona's communities should be considering regarding that intersection and especially thinking about heat resiliency?
I know I was just talking, but can I jump in?
Go for it. Yeah, if you have thoughts, go for it.
I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of opinions. Most of them I would say well-backed. One of the big critical things, and I actually worked in directly with some of the folks I see in the chat on this, and some directly is on parking reform, right? So at the city level in City of Phoenix, we tried to come up with a community and city collaboration on reforming our parking requirements just for housing development, but this is also critical for commercial, right? So I won't elaborate too much on what parking reform is. I'll drop something in the chat, but as we all know, parking lots absorb a lot of heat in there, and that is such valuable land in itself to be utilized for something that could house people, or it has a high economic value, and we're totally undervaluing it just by making it a place for cars to be stored, right? And they're oftentimes underutilized, so there's still often a lot of empty spaces, and that's why parking reform policies is so critical for us to consider in a hurry, actually. So I'll put something in the chat on that, but also another aspect I wanted to mention is that housing as well. There's a lot of bills going through the, I think most of them are on the governor's desk right now waiting to be signed. There's a lot of aspects to what we need to think about and looking at our landscape with housing even, and in smaller lots, and even smaller lots utilize less water. And there's studies on that too. I could drop in the chat here in a moment, but we need to get serious about rethinking the status quo, because Phoenix and the Valley, I should say in general, it's a very sprawl environment. And I had in the past become very comfortable with that look and didn't always favor anything that seemed even taller than 2 stories high. But time is of the essence, and we need to push policy that makes it easier for us to get to the basic amenities that we need, whether it's grocery stores and pharmacies. Can I just walk out the door to that? Maybe we need to start making it easier for corner stores to pop up and create more green corridors, which we really don't have enough here in Phoenix. And there's cities that we could look to benchmark off of. But one also thing is bike lanes. We need to really connect our bike lanes, make our sidewalks actually those safe places to be while you're walking, and just having that opportunity to bring in people who experience this every day, whether they're using transit or not. Having that opportunity to bring in these people experience it every day can be a challenge because they don't always have that time to do that. So that's why we need to look at organizations too, to consider, like Strong Towns Phoenix is one of them, Urban Phoenix Project, Trees Matter, Rail CDC. These people are the ones that are a lot of times boots on the ground, or they're connected to people who are experiencing these hardships, right? So collaborating with those groups. And another thing I just want to throw out there too is golf courses. A lot of golf courses have a hold on so much valuable land that actually has very little public benefit, if at all, because they're private and they have extreme tax benefits. And that's something I think at the state level we need to look at, because that's land that could be used towards public parks and even potentially for housing. And that's one of those things that it's very uncomfortable to talk about, because there's a lot of political and powerful money behind that. But we're at that place that we need to get provocative, we need to get daring. And if we're not having debates and arguments about it, then we're not really getting anywhere. So I just wanted to leave it with that. Sorry if I went a little bit longer than I thought I would. This is one of those passion points for me. Thank you.
That's okay. We love the passion. Maren, go ahead and hop in.
So I wanted to build off of what you were saying, Nicole. You talked a lot about the new building that we need to do, and I think there's how do we fund this? How do we fund not only the new building in a way that it's mitigates heat, but also how do we retrofit our existing infrastructure right now to make sure it's improve its heat, or I guess mitigate its heat. And I'm going to rattle off a few different options or fund sources here, because this is something that I've really been focused at a position right now. After the development of the heat plan, really it became quite apparent that there's a need for funding. And so people need to become, you got to be a little bit, expansive in how you look at heat mitigation funding for infrastructure. Because right now there actually isn't a ton out there. There's certainly a lot of increasing interest in how do we, in developing new. But but there are a lot of co-benefits to these to infrastructure that is resilient to heat and mitigates heat. So you look at where are the co-benefits for housing, for instance. So what energy efficiency things are out there that you can implement? What weatherization funding? Those are great sources of funding that's already available. Low income home energy assistance program. That is a fund for families in Arizona that has funded sufficiently at the federal level. That was something that was identified in the governor's extreme heat preparedness plan, and we are working on that with our delegation, and we're exploring some opportunities for look with other states that also haven't gotten their fair share of LIHEAP dollars. Those are funds that can be put towards cooling for families. There are EPA has environmental justice community grants that I think actually the application process is open now. This is something that really, if you're a nonprofit, this is something that is a great funding opportunity. There's another funding opportunity from FEMA called it's BRIC, B-R-I-C, and Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities, something like that. Anyway, BRIC with FEMA. There are some challenges with that one because there is a required match. But we are, again, at the state level, we're looking at how do we support communities to go after this BRIC funding, because this is really something that can be very helpful for communities that want to mitigate their heat. The Department of Energy has something called Energy Futures Grants, and there's a new round that's coming up, and I've got insider information that I think that's going to be focused on cooling, cooling grants. So keep that in your back pocket, keep your eyes out for that. And then I actually had a conversation with HUD last week, and they have a number, they mentioned a number of funding sources that are existing that can be put towards cooling accessories or so anyway, so there's the community development block grants can be used for cooling, which, you know, again, these are funding sources that you might not think of first when you think, oh, what can I do to help with heat relief or developing more cool infrastructure. That is something that can absolutely be used for that. And then the HUD formula funds that go directly to the municipalities and the states for community development in general, that in addition, there are other ones in addition to the CDBGs. All of that can go towards some cooling measures. So there's so many more, which it's I think one area of work that we could do, or somebody out there could do, is put together, you know, a compendium or something of funding for cooling and heat mitigation infrastructure, because as far as I know, that's not available. But so there's this piecemeal, if you will, but there are a lot of funds out there. And then I'm also talking to a number of philanthropists who are very interested now in heat mitigation, and, you know, how do they direct their dollars in the most impactful way. So again, I guess as this issue becomes more of a challenge and has more media and more just general attention on it, there will be more funding sources. But I think we need to start looking at how are we retrofitting our existing building and our built environment so that it's livable, because at this rate, it's not really going to be livable, or really, frankly, for a lot of populations, it's not going to be for people unless we start focusing on more cooling, a cool environment.
Thanks, Maren. We are running out of time, so I'm sorry to do this and to have to wrap up, but an hour really flies by when we're talking about important topics like heat resilient communities. And I'll give each of our panelists an opportunity to share their final thoughts and share anything else that we didn't get to. Again, we'll be sharing the link to the recording and any resources that were discussed during this webinar. I also wanted to share that List Phoenix is going to be having an event on Monday, June 10th. It's going to be launching a groundbreaking collection of essays called What's Possible, and that the essays will delve into the intersection of community development and climate resilience. So it's an afternoon event at ASU's Tempe campus. We will be sure to send a link to that event in the follow-up email. And thank you all for being such a great audience today, for sharing your thoughts, and for being such active participants in this webinar. Again, thank you on behalf of the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities to each of our panelists for sharing their expertise. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Saul and then go to Maren and have Nicole wrap us up. So if you could each share in just about a minute, I know that's a tough job, to your final thoughts, but thank you all for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone joining us at the next Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities webinar, and which will be happening in the third quarter. So stay tuned for more information on that. Without further ado, Saul, it's your turn. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank everybody for having me and for letting me participate in this webinar. It was great. I learned a lot from the other two, from Nicole and from sorry, from Maren, but one question I had for Maren was, like, I know you were able to, like, give us a lot of resources and a lot of, like, different places that people can find stuff like that. But how do you guys go? I mean, for us, we kind of like, we look for different resources online. We kind of figure stuff out. But like for people in the community that don't typically go on a computer or don't like, how do you guys blast that information out to them and let them know that these resources are out there?
We have a newsletter, and we try to consolidate resources that we know of that would be of interest to our newsletter. So if you can go on our website, there should be a form where you can put in your address if you're interested in getting the newsletter.
Perfect. Thank you.
Did you want me to go ahead, Serena?
Sure, go ahead. Thank you.
So this is an issue that heat is a disaster that kills more people every year than floods and hurricanes combined. And Arizona has been enduring this for several years now and will continue to. And that means that it deserves the attention of all levels of government and all sectors in the state, because we're not going to be able to protect people without that sustained and coordinated attention.
And I'll just briefly wrap up that, thank you again for this opportunity. And I know we're right at time, but just to challenge folks to get out there and see what it's like to get around without a vehicle for at least a week and do your basic amenities. And you'll really see what a lot of Phoenix and the Valley is experiencing. And with that, thanks too for the panels. I learned a lot as well, and I enjoyed this very much.
Thank you all so much for being here. In Nicole's very wise words, we need to get provocative, we need to get daring, and I just thank you all for thank the panelists for having that provocative and daring conversation today, and the audience members for also being willing to engage on this incredibly important topic. Take care, and we will see you all soon. Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.